Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the New Media Show. My name is Todd Cochran. I want to welcome you to the New Media Show. Got a great show lined up for you this morning. Of course, I want to give a warm introduction to my co-host, Mr. Rob Greenlee. Good morning, Rob.
Good morning. It's great to be back on the New Media Show. There's always interesting stuff to chat about. That is for sure.
And and Ernest, you're gonna have to square me away here. How do you pronounce your last name?
Barbaric is totally fine.
Barbe. I bet you had a lot of fun with that as a kid.
You know what?
I would imagine.
I'm
Yeah.
originally from Croatia, and so the pronunciation of my last name has always been one of those things that I've just let go about 20 years ago.
That's cool. Well, I have to ask though because your video image is absolutely stellar. What are you using for a webcam?
So this is just the stock MacBook Pro webcam, but I think the bigger issue is the lighting. So I have some studio lights on, and then I
Yeah.
have three soft boxes around me.
Oh, it's the video the audio. I mean, it looks beautiful. So
I'm
yeah.
really glad to hear that. I was a little bit concerned it was too white, too blown out.
No, no, no. Absolutely perfect. So it's sometimes we get all kinds of interesting video feeds, but no, no, absolutely awesome. So
Good. That's really glad to hear.
Plus, he also has a good choice in microphones. He's using the Shure DSM-7B. So,
yeah, and Rob, I think he's got his tied into a little better amplifier than you do. So
well, yeah, that's probably true. Unfortunately,
yeah,
all this, I'll just have to speak up today a little
it,
bit more.
there you go. For those of you that well, probably none of you know, we're just meeting Ernest this morning for the first time as well. Is Ernest is the I guess do we want to say the founder or the creator of Podsummit that's going to be happening in Montreal?
No,
It's happening in Calgary
Oh,
actually, and you
Calgary.
could
in
say either
Calgary, yeah.
founder or creator. Either one will work.
So this will be Western Canada's first podcast conference because we know that there's been a lot of podcast conferences in the Toronto area and Quebec as well. So good for you! Congratulations on organizing the show.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's been a really interesting journey so far.
Well, we are going to spend a little time this morning talking with Ernest about that, and of course, just covering what's going on in space, and that'll be kind of the topic for the day as it normally is here. But before we dive too deep in and talk about Pod Summit, I do want to talk about the announcement that Apple made earlier in the week about their branding change. Rob, any thoughts on the now we are Apple Podcast instead of iTunes Podcast? So what do you think of the branding change?
I think it was a long overdue because I don't know about you, Todd, but whenever I referred to Apple's platform, I was like conflicted. Do I call it the Apple Podcasts area or the Apple Podcast app or the iTunes Podcast area? So I think it definitely really cleaned up our ability to communicate. And I know, I called it at Microsoft. It was podcast at Microsoft, so it was. Um, I just think they're catching up. So it was good.
You know, I've always kind of referred to it as the Apple Podcast app. I've never called it the iTunes app. I've talked about iTunes obviously, but for me, it yeah definitely cleans up the branding. And I also noticed that they made an announcement that it makes me wonder what could be forthcoming. And I don't know if everyone got this or not, or maybe it's just maybe networks like ours got the message, but they're going to be doing something on the 21st. They're going to be offline with the podcast.apple.com for 6 to 9 hours or something like that on the 21st. So I wonder if
Hmm.
we're going to see something else being brought
That would
online. I wonder if they're rolling in new infrastructure.
That would
Well,
be interesting.
changing the name may be just the beginning of seeing some significant updates. So that's exciting to
Well,
hear.
it stayed the same for a very long time, and so I think it'll be interesting because it really seems like Apple is rebranding a lot of their products the same way. So they're getting away from the iMac and iThings. So I think this is just part of the overall branding change that Apple is going through. But in terms of podcasts specifically, I think that with the growth of the medium, I think we're probably going to see a little bit more changes to the infrastructure as well, especially with high end places like um, New York Times and those kind of companies coming on board. I think they're probably going to be looking at how do we cater to those types of large audience gainers, essentially, for them in a better to a better degree.
I don't know. I don't know if they're going to do that or not. They a lot of complainers, but I don't think Apple's going to do a lot of the things that they want. But Rob, just so everybody knows, on the live stream, we know Rob is quiet, so nothing we can do. We've got him cranked all the way up here, so apologize about that.
Yeah, I'll have to get an amp or something like that to put into my system here.
Yeah,
So
so you're definitely about half my volume. That's where the delta's coming in. So Rob, what do you think about what the point Ernest brought up?
well, I don't know that they're going to do anything specific to cater to specific types of content providers. I think they're going to try and look at the big picture of how can they, you know, really kind of improve the experience of the podcast area to their users to make it grow more again. Because I think that one of the challenges that they've seen is that some other app developers out there have been kind of making better apps. So I just wonder if they're just going to come out with some improvements to the UI and some improvements to how people kind of discover podcasts. And this isn't necessarily tremendously new for Apple. They've had a regular pattern of improving the app on iOS. I just wonder if they're going to put any resources into the iTunes application to improve the podcast experience over there. I mean, are people using iTunes that much anymore? Is Apple going to invest in the iTunes structure? Maybe it's time to retire iTunes. I don't know. I think that's a bigger question. I know a lot of people are not real happy with the iTunes application, especially on Windows. And what is Apple going to do with that application? I think it's a big question.
You're talking about the regular app, right? The iTunes application. We're not talking about any You're talking about the regular program, iTunes, right?
Correct,
Yeah,
correct. The ones that the application that runs on Mac and
yeah,
Windows.
yeah. Does
What are they
anybody
going to
even
do with that app?
does anybody even use that anymore?
I would say that I would say, Todd, that millions of people use it because millions of people have Macs.
yeah. I
And
So
me
I
being
mean,
one of
until
those
they
folks,
merge
I use it quite a bit
iOS
as
with
well.
the Mac OS, which I think is coming as well, um, it's they're going to have to do something with that application.
What were you saying, Ernest?
Well, I use iTunes
Oops.
quite a bit, right? And so the other part that might be kind of interesting is that I built a PC actually last Christmas, and so now I have iTunes on the PC and I have my Apple ecosystem, everything. So we have everything from the iPads, phones. I have a couple of different, a few of their laptops. I have MacBook Pro, MacBook Air, and so it is an interesting the Windows system iTunes is quite a bit backwards. It seems it
Yeah,
looks quite outdated. It doesn't scale really well on the 4K screens, so that might be another area of improvement. But like Rob was mentioning earlier, you have a lot of people that have invested heavily into the system. That's still the way you would buy music, for example, through iTunes and stream and all this kind of stuff. On the podcast side, since they flipped out the app itself onto its own app on your phone, it might be an interesting development. So we might see a little bit more development in that perspective, and maybe it'll get some similar functionality to what books did when they broke it out. And so now you can actually listen to audiobooks on there in chapters and some of those types of interesting technologies that might be porting over to podcasts too.
Yeah,
yeah. And
something
Todd,
hey Ernest, we're still getting popping from you. Are you getting chat notifications or anything? I'm just trying to figure out where that's coming from. Every once in a while we get a boop boop. It doesn't necessarily sound. There it is again. I don't know what it is.
I'm not sure. I don't have anything turned on.
That's odd.
It's
It
silent. I'm not sure.
yeah. It's It's
I'm
odd.
sorry about that
No, no,
if
no,
you're
no,
getting
no
it on the
worries.
other end.
Yeah, it's just once in a while Skype acts weird too. So
Hmm.
and I think the important thing too to remember is the Android users out there. The other 50% of the podcast consumers could give two craps about iTunes.
Right.
So well, anyway, it was an interesting announcement. I don't know what the long-term ramifications are. I guess we'll see over time what develops. But
Well, Todd, it could also mean that they're going to come out with a new application that's going to replace iTunes. That they drop the term iTunes too. I think it's a
Mm.
possibility. Or they're going to break up iTunes on the Mac into two separate applications. There could be a podcast app on the Mac and a music app, or they might just break out podcasts from iTunes um, completely. Who knows?
well, we will see. And a lot of speculation on potentially what Apple may or may not bring to the table. There was a lot of folks who immediately got excited about, oh, they're gonna turn on membership where we're gonna be able to have people pay for our podcast. And
Oh, there you go.
you
Yeah.
know, and I always laugh when I hear that because it's a lot of people are setting up membership type sites, but such a small percentage of podcasts are successful with that model. It's I think that the most people that are waiting for that will be sadly disappointed about the actual results in and if they actually make it available or it's allowed to be done.
Yeah, Todd,
Even maybe even
I tend to
including
agree with you. I think that the whole premium side of the podcasting with Apple, it just doesn't feel like that would be a smart choice for them to do, given the success that they've had with the model that they've been on, and the business that they're in is selling devices, not selling podcasts. It's not going to generate enough money for them to do the development that they would have to do to make it happen.
Well, I think some people want the ability, the option to turn it on maybe a specific show or feed where
Yeah.
people can charge for episodes. But unless you're a
even including
huge, massive show, I don't know.
even including something like they have with the iAd system, right? Where you would have the ability to monetize, for example, your show and then have some kind of revenue split with Apple. I think that would shouldn't be too much of a leap because you can have automatic insertions at the front and at the end of the podcast as well for ads. So that could be another interesting opportunity for them to leverage.
Ernest, I'm gonna hate to do this to you. Can you redial in? We'll see if we can clear that tweaking. Just go ahead and dial in and hang up and then dial back in. We'll see if that clears it.
Absolutely, let's try that.
Yeah, let's try it. Rob, while he's running that in and coming back in, what else you seeing in the news this week?
Well, I think there's just been just a steady flow of stuff going on. I mean, I thought that the Apple announcement really kind of stole the show to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that there's just this steady flow of articles coming out. I know that there's a couple coming out next week that I've heard about. It's just the spin and the movement in the space just keeps moving forward, and I know I'm heading to the Pod Summit here in the next couple weeks, or no, well, yeah, and then also the NAB event is coming up even sooner. So,
Right.
and that's turning out to be a pretty significant event for podcasting too, with lots of podcasting panels happening at the NAB this year. I know you and I are both doing a lot of those,
Yep.
and
So
it should be interesting down there.
so we're so I guess maybe you can fill the audience and me in a little bit as well. Now I know we got substituted. We're going to do a second session now on Wednesday as well. That's open to any NAB participant. They don't have to have any special pass or nothing. Have a floor pass, correct?
Yes, correct. If can get into the exhibition down at the NAB, you can come to this panel that's going to happen down there on the floor itself. It's free to get in, and it's really as part of the floor. I mean, it's right there with the exhibitors on the floor. I did a panel, with the same organization down there. It's an advertising pavilion, is what it is, And so a lot of the panel sessions that are going on the show floor are about digital advertising. So this particular panel session that's going to include you, me, and Rob Walsh, and a representative from Voice America who does a certain amount of advertising online. It's more of a streaming platform, but they also do some podcasting as well. It's Voice America is part of World Talk Radio.
Yep.
So they're going to be joining us on the panel as well. But the topic is really how podcasters are turning into some major influencers, and what the impact of that is on driving ad results, and so that's the main topic that we're going to talk about on that panel. It's all of us are major influencers when it comes to potentially running ads on your show, and what's the impact of that.
Did they update the? I know that when I last looked, the listing still showed the old panel that was there. Have they swapped the panel listing out yet on the website?
I I have not looked, but I would think that that's probably coming ASAP.
Okay. Yeah, as soon as we get an update on that, definitely let me know so we can start promoting
Yep.
it as well. So two opportunities, and they're both on Wednesday. So if you're at NAB, and again, as I've said before, if you're going to be at NAB and don't have a session pass, please let me know. We might be able to get you into the first session that will include myself, Rob Walsh, Rob McCracken from Scripps, where we're going to be talking about basically the state of podcasting to radio GMs and influencers. So if you're going to be at NAB and you want to attend that, Rob and I might be able to, excuse me, sneak a few of you into that. At least the organizer has told us, let him know if we've got a couple of people that want to come in. So that's an invitation. If you don't have an actual session pass on Wednesday, we'll have a link up to those sessions in the show notes today when we get done with the show. Let's go ahead and shift here for a little bit. Let's go ahead and talk about Pod Summit. It's happening in Calgary on May 6th. And Ernest, why don't you go ahead and start since something just happened to Rob on his video? Go ahead.
Sure. So, Pod Summit is a podcast conference happening on the western side of the country, which we have not had a conference here, a podcast conference here ever. So this is the first one. It's going down to May 6th in Calgary, Alberta, and we have quite a few folks coming in actually from all over Western Canada and United States, which is really really exciting.
So tell us a little bit then about what you're going to be doing, and kind of give us the rundown for someone that may be within striking distance of this that would want to come.
Sure. So basically, what this ended up being is all of the things that I, as a podcaster, would have liked to learn. And since there was no real opportunities in regards to other conferences in our area, I decided to build this one. And so we layered. There's a few different layers to the conference itself. So it's cornerstoned by four main session speakers. So we have Meg Wilcox, who's coming in and talking about how to put together a long form audio podcast. And one of the reasons for this is because we've noticing that, and you probably everybody's noticed this already. For example, with shows such as S Down Serial and some of the other really well produced podcasts that are coming from New York Times and other larger companies, is that you're noticing there's a certain ebb and flow to the show, and it's structured so well. So we as podcasters may not have a whole producing team on our side, but if we know the principles of how to put together a show that we can hold somebody's attention for 20, 30, or 40 minutes, it's going to be really valuable for us as podcasters. And Meg has been a journalist. She teaches podcasting at a university. Then we move on into a production. So we have a fella by the name of Brock Skywalker Armstrong coming in from Vancouver, Canada, and he's been a audio engineer for 20 years. He currently works with Bulletproof Radio. So if you've heard of Bulletproof Coffee and Dave Asprey, so he works with their team and produces that podcast. And so he's going to tell us about how to create a signature sound for your podcast, which was another thing that I was always interested in, but I could never really figure out. So I use a lot of different. Experimented with a lot of different music and intros, and should I say your name in the beginning or in the middle or at the end, or how to start. But one of the things that he's been able to figure out is that how do you create that soundscape? How do you to create that podcast sonically so it's instantly recognizable? So the second you listen to S Down, you know what it is. The second you listen to, some of these other larger podcasts, you know what it is and you know who it is. And so he's going to walk us through that. Then we have another person coming down from Edmonton who's going to teach us all about how to do interviews. And the other really cool thing about this session is that we're going to be deconstructing an interview live on stage as it's happening. So he will interview somebody on stage and basically, kind of pause and look at the audience and say, this is why we're asking this question. Here's what I'm trying to get to. And here's how I'm going to structure the next question. So you'll actually get to learn the art of interviewing live on stage, and you'll get a chance to participate as a part of the audience. And then for the last session, we have somebody coming in who's working with Rob Sixterliano. I always mess up his last name. So he has a podcast network essentially for reality TV podcasts. Specifically, it started
Oh,
off with Survivor and
oh,
then Big Brother, and it kind of
Rob
expanded from there.
Rob Sesternino is coming to your event.
Yes.
Oh,
And sorry,
awesome.
he's not coming to
Okay.
our event, but Scott St. Pierre, who is his producer, is coming to the
Oh,
event.
okay.
Yeah, and so he'll tell us
Gotcha.
about the ways that they've been able to build their audience, engage their audience, and monetize. So those are the main four sessions, and then we have two live interviews on stage. One with one third of a podcast called The Strategist, which was a really prominent political podcast, and then another woman from her name by the name of Karen Unland, who's coming in from Edmonton, and she's going to tell us about this really exciting new thing that she's building with a radio station called CKUA, which is going to be an Alberta-wide podcast network, and it might expand to Western Canada or Western states as well. So those are some of the main sessions that we're going to have. And then if you've never podcasted before, we have a lunch hour session on how to start podcasting. We're giving away a bunch of stuff. It's going to be a really good day. I'm really looking forward to it.
Rob, it shows you that I'm listening to these names. I've never heard of these people before, so it's like it's just a whole different dichotomy. You've got the Canada side. I'm sure those folks are well known in Canada, so it just shows you the space is diversifying. And you and I've been in this space a long time, and you're like, I'm thinking, who? So,
Right.
um, but it is interesting. It sounds radio heavy though. Do all these folks actually have? Are they actually
Podcast.
podcasting?
Yes, so every single one of the people that we're bringing out has a podcast. They do have some radio experience, which is what I think made them really good podcasters as well. Um, yeah, so everyone has had or currently is building a podcast as well.
Well, that's cool. Rob, I know you're going to head out there, right?
Yeah, yeah. I'm going. It's really not that far for me to go up to Calgary from Seattle, so it's a quick trip for me. But I think I see that Ray Ortega is going to be there too, which is exciting. Todd and I have known Ray for a long time, so it's great to have him, go up there. But really, I think what I see with your event is just a huge opportunity for building a really good and terrific conference. You've already started and you're already on the path here up in Canada, and I think that's really important to the podcasting space. That's a market that I know that a lot of us on the hosting space really want to have a better presence in, and it's a market that has a lot of opportunity, I think, to expand podcasting. But it also has kind of an interesting kind of European flair to it, because as I think about coming from Spreaker, and we work with a lot of events around the world. Todd, your point of that the radio part is always kind of a significant part of events that are outside of the U.S. And I think that's an interesting point of perspective. I mean, a lot of the audio that's coming out of even Spain and other parts of the world, the UK, a lot of the content that's in the podcasting space does kind of source out of radio still today. But so if you could talk a little bit about that as far as the radio connection with podcasting up in Canada, and do you see a strong area of growth of people starting podcasts that don't have a background in radio and that are just creating shows just about their expert area. So are you seeing a significant growth in that in the Canadian market?
Definitely. I think what's interesting with the radio side, I think it's the reason why we brought some of these folks to speak, I think, is because they would have the teaching experience to
Yeah.
relay some of the like the technicalities and the um learning moments essentially for us, for everyone in the audience. And so the other thing that's interesting is that there are a lot of podcasters that don't have a radio background. And then we also, one of the things that I have noticed, and I'm not sure if it's
Okay.
happening in the States as much, is that the radio stations that we have in Canada are also producing quite a bit of their shows into a podcast as well. And I think part of the reason why that's happening is that they're looking to expand their audience and to expand the audience, and then eventually to have some more advertiser revenue and those kind of things. On the other end of the scale, there are a lot of individuals that have built up large interest based podcast. So I know quite a few folks that have started from nothing essentially recently, if they've built up a presence. One of the more interesting ones that I've met recently, and this is the other thing that I had no idea. I always play in the entrepreneurship and marketing circles and business. Those are the podcasts that I listen to. And I had no idea how big the reality TV podcast game is. And so when I met when I met Scott, chatted with him. So I was like, well, that's really interesting that you guys have this giant following and all over the place, and there's these people that would hop on board, and now they're expanding their show palette to include people that were originally fans, and then they've started their own podcast. And then I also had a chance to meet with somebody from just chat with somebody from Edmonton who has the world's biggest Doctor Who podcast. And that would have never even crossed my mind that was a thing. So it's been an interesting eye-opening experience for me to meet some of these folks and to really get an understanding of how different the space actually is. There's quite a few folks that are starting podcasts on their own, and there's also this radio influence that you're mentioning. I think those are the folks that are now coming into it after radio stations have shed some of their personnel and are looking to reinvent themselves in this kind of a new way in order to build up their own personal brand and kind of create some kind of a new career path as well. So that's why I think we have a lot of folks with the radio and broadcasting experience getting into podcasting in some of these other areas as well.
They've been thrown to the floor.
That's right.
Consolidation happened
Yeah.
everywhere. It is interesting because I think I looked yesterday, and we've got about 300 or 350 total radio station / radio personality customers. And there's probably, of that mix, there's probably 25 to 30 that are actually out of Canada. So um, it is and I don't know what the total podcast ecosphere is in Canada. It's got to be pretty big, I would assume, basically that, because it's easy for the English speaking, to cross right over into U.S. audiences as well. So
It is, but at the same time, the U.S. based podcasts are outnumber Canadian ones 10 to 1, even on the Canadian iTunes.
right,
And
yeah.
so, and because the shows are so strong, so one of the more popular ones based out of Canada is called Canada Land,
Hmm.
and it's a political based podcast. And so, even if you compare their download numbers to some of the more interest based podcasts, there's a big dichotomy. And I think even right now, when you get somebody like I was mentioning earlier, New York Times getting into the podcast game, they have an audience built in that you're supporting. It's like, hey, listen to us on iTunes now.
You might
Or
be
when Estelle,
you
go
might
ahead.
be surprised that you think they would have a huge amount of pull, but you would be kind of surprised sometimes that does not always turn into audience members. Um, even S Town, they did not get as big of a bump from their show from the holdover from Serial, because they were offline so long. So,
Yeah.
um, not doing, with these little short series that a lot of these companies are doing, oftentimes they're handicapping their audiences. Now, don't get me wrong; they've had huge success. Any podcaster would be happy with S Towns with success, but also they have the journalist in their pocket. So I think I counted in 1 week 52 articles that came out from S Town, and that was because of a very effective, you know, interconnections in the New York City area with journalists and the ongoing love affair with public radio that those journalists have. So I think oftentimes the great shows that are doing incredible numbers of episode after, you look at a show that's doing 500,000, and there are shows now doing 500,000 listeners per episode.
Mhm.
Um, that show gets no credit. Is they go months and months and months and months and doing those same types of numbers, but yet nary a peep out of the press on those types of shows. So oftentimes it really, you know, it's just because they don't have the connections in New York and they're not of that,
Yeah.
it's not the folks they went to school in at the Ivy League school that they went to. So,
Yeah, and also those big shows don't always show up in the iTunes top
right.
200 either.
Yeah, they don't.
So they're kind of hidden from the scene, and I think one thing to keep in mind too, as you talk about like a media company like the New York Times, is they've been in and out of the podcasting space based on the winds of what the perception of the industry is, because they came in very early when podcasting started, but then
They
they
left.
stopped, they dropped out right during like 2009, 10, and were completely out of the podcasting space for a couple of years, and then they more recently have come back in again because it's become more popular again.
It, it
uh,
it does
yeah.
make us laugh, Rob, because people are, oh, New York Times is starting podcasting. I'm like, for the third time.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But that's, I mean, there's plenty of companies that I could say have had that journey. I mean, back when I was working on Zune, I would fly out and meet with a lot of these companies, like National Geographic had a huge podcast network back in 2007, and they completely, even back then, they were talking about dropping doing podcasts. And so you're starting to see this. I mean, there's been this churn of these big media companies coming in and out of the podcasting space, and a lot of people in the space don't really know the history of what's happened in this medium, and how it's kind of ebbed and flowed over many years, and how a lot of these big media companies have kind of come and gone. Because I mean, there were periods of time when those big media companies were basically talking down about
Mm-hmm.
podcasting. It was about the
Hmm.
same time as Steve Jobs came out and said it was amateur hour for podcasters. I mean, a lot of those media companies jumped on that and said, they were kind of downplaying what podcasting could offer to their companies. There was no way for them to make any money, and they were going to drop out of it. But now, things have changed, and which is terrific. I mean, I think it's great that these media companies are jumping back in, but I think we just have to keep in mind that if things downturn again, or the hype cycle drops again, we could see a lot of these companies drop out again. So,
And
Rob,
chances are we'll experience another drop as well. I have a feeling that I get a sense that there's been a significant increase in popularity of podcasts, but at the same time, when people start, there's a lot of, so I work in marketing. And so one of the things that I'll run into, people will ask me, like, is a podcast a really good idea for us? Well, I don't know. It's not going to be something that you can produce 5 shows and then make $5 million. That's not how it works. A lot of these
mhm,
podcasts have been around, like you mentioned, for years, and are just now getting to the point where, after years of consistent effort, building their audience, building that engagement, and connecting with them, are now to the point where they actually have a sizable audience and they can consider monetizing it if they choose to do so. And so, from the brand perspective and the business perspective, they're most of these companies would look for some kind of a quick hit. And I also have a feeling that with as the popularity rises, that hype cycle that you mentioned, it's eventually going to fall back down again. And then the folks that stay, that have consistently built up a presence, that have engaged with their audiences, those are the folks
mhm.
that are going to stay there for the long term. And the podcasting may evolve a little bit here, a little bit there over the years, but I think it's those individuals and those companies that have chosen to invest in it for the long term and for the right reasons, they're going to remain after all the chaff basically falls down.
I have a feeling that, I like to call it I think the
Mhm.
correct term that both of you are using is hype cycle, because
Mhm.
the podcasting growth has been steady. There's not been any like
Yeah.
wow jumps in, in actual audience. So the hype cycle definitely helps continued growth.
It
And, and,
does. Yeah.
and, and then that's always important. But, having been in this since the beginning, since 2004, and, really watch the space, we often chuckle that, okay, we're on our third up and down of and I thought just for a little while at the beginning of the year, I thought we were starting to see a rolling off, and
Yeah.
then it's back again. It's back as hot and heavy as it ever's been in the recent past couple of years as far as in news cycles. It just seems to me that there's a lot of folks too that are opportunists that are jumping in and trying to make a name for themselves, which is fine. But
Mhm.
just like anything else, we'll see if they're here in 3 years. We'll see if
And
there's
that's the difference.
yeah.
Well, Todd, I think one of the things that I think gives me that impression that we could see some sort of a fall off is just the rapid amount of new content coming into the space and the relatively slow audience growth. And I just wonder if there's going to be kind of a fallback from that at some point down the line. I could be wrong, and I hope I'm wrong. But it is something that I think about and I worry about. And I know we've talked about that a little bit on this show. Is that these things have to equal out, right? The amount of content that's out there. I mean, how many people are going to want to start a show and not be able to build an audience for that show to be able to justify the time and investment in starting a show? Is there going to be kind of like it's a supply and demand balance that even really applies to the podcasting space?
And at the same point, when 85 or 90% of the advertising dollars are going to the top 3% of shows, and
Yeah.
and I was expecting a little more trickle down this year than what we've seen. I've seen some trickle down bound into shows that, advertising be done on smaller shows, but now certain players in the market are helping to suppress CPM levels. I've talked to a couple of companies that have been doing some programmatic ad buying
Hmm.
on a specific network, and they've come in and said, we'll pay 6, and I'm like, no, we're not doing 6. We're not doing we're not doing that based upon what your experience was over here on an injected ad with that wasn't done, in my opinion, professionally. So, Rob Walsh has run into some of that already too. So now, with the desire, or with companies' desire to fill inventory at all costs to meet bottom line numbers, ultimately we could end up hurting the small producers. Eroke, there will be no going back. So that concerns me a great deal. Um,
Well, Todd, I mean, at the end of the day, doesn't the CPM levels reflect what the ROI is on campaigns? Um, I mean,
Not when
is
you're
that
not when you're willing to sell at all cost. When
yeah,
if you're
Yeah.
desperate to sell inventory and you'll sell it at 6,
yeah, yeah.
I don't think so. We'll see. I'm holding the line and walking away from those types of deals. But at what point do the the top 20 advertisers that are advertising the space start coming in with that type of CPM offers for the mainstream companies? What happens when Gimlet takes a $6 deal, and if they are,
Hmm.
maybe they've got the volume to make it up. Then it just completely is going to be for as far as monetization goes, it's going to be an absolute shit show for the rest of the space. But what you know, I think too, another thing to look at is um, if that's going to become the norm, then there's going to be a lot of podcasting companies that aren't going to make it. They're not going to make it on $6 CPMS.
Hmm.
I think it's also kind of interesting if you look at the different monetization models. Sponsorships and ads are so there's ads, there's sponsorships, there's Patreon, there's a few other different ways to do it. But from an ad perspective, from a as a marketer, what I want to do is I want to spend the least amount of money and get the best amount of results. And with the podcasting, and this is actually might be kind of an interesting thing to tie it back to what Apple might be doing, is it's hard to prove ROI
Oh,
unless you say it's
it's
it's like one of the What's that?
I disagree. It's not hard. I disagree that it's hard to follow ROI. A well executed campaign with the right controls put in place, you can absolutely measure ROI to the customer. But the
But it's usually done through a landing page or a code, right?
absolutely,
Right. So I mean, that gives you definitely gives you some measurement. But I think in terms of it's equivalent to radio then, and I guess that's what some folks might equate it to. And then radio rates are going to be very different than podcasting rates. So I think it's a new area for a lot of advertisers to explore, which is why we're seeing a lot of these kind of ups and downs and confusion, I think, as well.
well, yeah, we can spend a whole hour on this alone. But
Well, I mean, Todd, I mean, I think to kind of take a middle ground on those two perspectives is that I know, and I struggled with this back in the early days with my own radio show is trying to make sure that the advertiser understood that there is a certain amount of value in baked in
Hmm.
ads over the long term that has an impact on branding too, and it's not just about conversion of sales. So there is a certain element to this that does come into play that's similar to what radio has been doing. Radio hasn't been entirely about direct conversion of sales. They've been about branding and about raising awareness and building frequency because you have to build frequency before you can have any kind of a brand loyalty built up or a transaction that actually happens. And one of the things that I've thought about, Todd, too, is that the whole programmatic ad buying stuff doesn't have to drive CPMs lower. And I'm not sure why that dynamic happens. Um,
Hmm.
I, somehow, is there a perception that just because an ad buyer can go in and buy against a show that the CPMs have to be lower based on the history of radio? And I think that's probably what we're talking about here. Is really those buyers that are coming in that are coming from radio that are used to buying at $6 CPMs on our a remnant type of inventory from broadcast radio, and they have this expectation that they can buy it at a lower price. And then there's the whole aspect of, well, what's the content of the ad as well, Todd? Um, is that content or that ad spot, is that a host read type of experience, or is it a commercial radio type of experience? And I think these are really, really important issues, Todd. And I think you would agree that the industry needs to get solid on about how they're going to conduct advertising in programmatic ad buying platforms, because I think it's an opportunity, but it can also, like you say, it can go horribly wrong.
with as far as just to kind of close the loop on the measurement side, not measurement side. I don't even want to get into that today. The um, performance side.
Advertising side.
Yeah, the direct response makes up 90% of the advertisers right now in the podcasting space. Direct
Yep.
response is purely measured on results. They don't
Hmm.
care. They absolutely give two whips um,
Branding, right?
about branding. It's all
Yeah,
it's about the response. Now, when Ford and Geico and all those companies come in that are continue to build brand awareness, then it's a different deal,
sure.
But the awareness campaigns for a brand are not advertising in podcasts right now. They're still spending the majority of their money in radio
TV.
and in TV. So
Yep.
it'll shift over time. Don't get me wrong, but to this point, the direct response is the haven of podcasting. So your performance on your ad deals are 100% based upon how many number of leads, how many number of sales. It's purely that. And if you don't succeed, they don't renew. You look at my essentially, um, well, how many years now has it been? It'll be 12-year run with GoDaddy.
Yep.
That is a direct response, and it is a performance base, and I have to meet performance numbers each and every month. Um,
Yep.
they've already built their brand, so yeah, we can spend again a lot of time on this. But Rob, I do agree with you in the point that there is a way to do programmatic correctly, um, but
But we're not there.
we're not there because a lot of companies do not, they just want to come and buy an ad and here's your 30-second spot, drop it in. They just want the spot run. They don't want to have this go through this creative process and have to hire someone because that's what they will do. They will hire someone to create creative for a campaign, and a lot of these companies just don't do that. They have one ad they run nationwide, and they don't want to have to write scripts for podcasters. So podcast companies are going to have their own creative divisions
Hmm.
to set these campaigns up and make them work right from a programmatic side to make it deliver the CP or deliver the results that a what you would expect from a host endorsed ad. And it can be done
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
Hmm.
and Todd, I
Definitely.
I
I mean,
100% agree with that. I think that's the direction that the industry should go. And my concern is that there's still going to be a bunch of advertisers that are going to come into this market and run their radio ads into podcasts, and it's just going to be $2, $3, $6 CPM campaigns, and it's just going to trash the reputation of the opportunity that podcasting brings to the market.
Tom in the chat room says, question, on the other hand of this, the little guy trying to advertise his product or service can't spend $50 a bucks a week with the big advertising firms he can with me. That's true, Thomas. That's absolutely true. They can come to you directly and spend 50 bucks or 100 or whatever it may be with you
Hmm.
directly.
Yep.
And anytime you can get a direct deal, that's great. Tom Webster's in the chat room too. He says we've executed over a dozen pre-post brand lift studies for pure brand advertisers now. Results are there and brand ads are growing. DR is still king though. Yeah, so it's
Mhm.
true. The brand advertisers, Tom, they are the holy grail of bringing billions of dollars to the podcasting space. Let's be frank. That's where the majority of the advertising is spent globally. So the sooner those brand advertisers show up and start spending their cash, bring your cash.
Well, and I guess
the
Todd,
be-
that's a leading question. What is it going to take in our medium to get those guys over here,
I,
and really support them for what they need? Is a it's a That's an important question. Is
well,
programmatic
there
part of that?
there's another shift just in terms of business strategy in regards to, are you looking at short-term results, which is what stakeholders and shareholders generally really want? So they're looking on a quarterly basis. So that's why you have so much direct response type of
Yeah.
inquiries, and that's why we were talking about earlier. What's the ROI? If I give you $50, can I get 60 leads? And how much is? And so like looking and in 7 days, versus looking something like building up more of a presence, a brand awareness, and then a brand affinity that will have a lifetime value of much more. But to get those kind of education elements, like there that has to be a change in the marketing side of things as well. One iron that I'd like to toss into the fire right now, and this is something I've chatted with a couple of folks recently, is AI and voice. And if you look at Google now, and if you look sorry, Google Home, and look at Amazon Alexa and Amazon Echo, and some of these new types of devices that we're able to interact with them through our voice, this gives a unique opportunity for podcast as well to provide content while people are, for example, doing stuff around the house. Right now they would have everything plugged into their headphones, and that's the way that I do things. But this is another really unique opportunity. I think we're going to see more of a shift towards voice-based interfaces and an audio-based content as well, just in the way that we interact with things, which might be a really interesting opportunity in the next few years for podcasters too.
well, we've talked about this a number of times on the show, and we agree that the Google Homes and the Amazon Alexas of the world are going to start to see Um, we're going to see a lot more content being consumed on there. But right now, the numbers are pretty low, and they haven't even broke the 1% barrier yet. So when we start seeing some growth with Google Home and Alexa actually, breaking out above 3, 4, 5%, then I'll get excited. But until then, I do think it's a huge potential growth area, and we'll see. Rob, where do you think?
Yeah, I think it's still early for that that device to have a huge impact, but I agree with just the premise that those type of devices are going to be significant in how people consume audio content and podcasts. It's just that the platform itself, the Echo and the Google Home, they need to get better, and they need to have more content, and it's just there. and they need to be more ubiquitous. They need to be on your
Hmm.
mobile phone. It needs to be on in your car. It needs to be in your kitchen for these things to really hit their stride of their opportunity. And I'm trying to work on that as well. In trying to create some experience of being able to drive podcasters and not necessarily have to go through TuneIn to be able to get on there, because there's got to be some other ways that we can work with the Amazon folks to make a better catalog for podcasts. And from what I understand, Google isn't even supporting podcasts yet on their Google Home device.
You
Um,
can. There is a
you
key.
can.
There's a
Okay.
key. There's a sequence. I've broken the super decoder ring.
You did.
Yeah. So here's what you say to Google Home for those of you that are interested. I'm looking for my. I've got it written down as a script.
What
Crap.
else?
You go
So
up,
okay.
down,
So
right.
I won't say okay. The keyword to get the Google Home device because it's sitting right here in my on my desk. But you say
No,
okay.
Todd, do it. Do it.
You say okay. You know who? Play the podcast Geek News Central. So that's a key. You have to say okay. Play the podcast Geek News Central, and it'll work. Um, and
So
then
is
with
it pulling from the Google Play Music
no one,
catalog, do you think?
I think so. We were looking
No
at
one.
we were looking at some stats to try to determine, try to kind of back roll it in, and of course Google Play they don't report back out yet, so you have to go into the Google Play. So I had like 10 of my team members all do it on their devices, and then we looked at it to say, okay, is it coming? We think it's coming from Google Play at this point.
Hmm.
That
So
would certainly make sense, right, Todd?
yeah, it would. And Daniel says no, it pulls from the RSS feed. Hmm. Well,
Which would make
Okay.
sense as a search engine, right? The other thing that I think we might have a very interesting opportunity here, depending on how things go. Podcasts aren't searchable by nature. You can search the title, you can search some of the stuff that's embedded in the description of the RSS feed or RSS. But for example, you don't have something like or transcripts, I guess, if you've written them up. But there isn't something that automatically OCRs the content and indexes the content inside of a podcast that could be searchable by a search engine, which would be another really interesting development that maybe that's something that Apple might have up their sleeve as well. I
yeah,
see Rob smiling. Do you know something that we don't?
Nope.
and herein lies the challenge of that. And a lot of podcasters have experimented with folks doing they write, they don't translate, they
Transcribe?
and transcribe the shows. Unless you're very, very careful in transcribing the show and embedding that correctly in your show notes, Google will often see that as it's not a positive, and they will negatively impact your Google search results for your .com unless you really do heavy editing and you make it contextual. So it's the script cannot be for humans. It has to be Google readable.
Hmm.
And people say, what's the difference? Me talking right now and having that transcribed gives Google very little actual context. So you have to remove all the fluff. You got to, you have to almost make it like a question answer type of scripting in order to make it even have any impact on Google search results. If you're putting it, I would, again, if you haven't experimented with this, I would never ever put your transcript on the same page that your .com is. I would have it in a forum. I'd have it on a separate link to a separate site. Just because if you get it wrong, you very well could just fall off the face of the earth when it comes to Google search. So you have to be very, very careful. Google did announce recently some changes for at least on their Google app in Android to search and actually have podcasts, the latest episode, come up in the search results. That was just basically implementing something easily in the header, and those that is effective. But I think that's a prelude to maybe Google making that available in the web search, or mobile search. through the website versus the app. I'm excited to see if they'll ever roll that into that. That'll be a game changer itself. But I think the biggest failure of podcasters not being able to be found is most of them have no clue on how it comes to actually preparing their websites and doing the little extra work to make themselves SEO ready, writing great titles, writing great show notes, having great context in their content so that they can be found, and using any type of SEO strategy of linking in and linking out. Most podcasters spend very little time at that. And if they did, uh, you find the shows that do it well, you find them very easily when you're looking for a specific topic. Uh, I don't think per se anyone goes into iTunes searching for a show. If they do, they're going to be sadly, it's going to be very sad the results that they come up with.
So let me flip the script here around on you guys, because this is an interesting opportunity to ask you this question. So both of you have had quite a bit of experience with podcasting and with building shows. If you had to go back, or if you had the opportunity to go back to when you were first starting, what would you do differently, if
Ugh.
anything?
First two episodes, not play AC/DC. Um, uh, no, really, and
That's awesome.
the only way I have gotten here from there is recording two episodes a week for 12 years. There's no way what the show was in the beginning. Um, well, if I knew all the tricks, if I could go back with lessons learned,
Mhm.
um, well, I don't know. I stuck with the same format. It's worked pretty good. But I just been able to get better. The only way you get better is by, churning out episodes. And even then, even after almost 1,200 episodes, I still make mistakes. So it's a learning experience. But I think
Would you
that,
do anything differently, or would you just like keep everything as it was?
I personally, I don't think I would change anything. Rob, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think back to my early days of doing this stuff, and I made a lot of mistakes around what I was doing because I was doing it mainly for radio back when I started. So I was running commercial radio ads in my podcast back then. And I know if I go back and listen to my archives, there's some pretty awful ads that were in there, and you know, and I would say, but back then I got most of my audience from the radio side. So I was doing the right thing at the time. So I think as you look back like this, I think Todd, you fit into this as well. You were doing the best that you could do at the time,
But
and I'm not sure that thinking now of what we understand now about the medium really applies because those weren't really options for us anyway back then. I mean, I I know I just didn't think about different kinds of ads necessarily back in 2004. Um, and I don't think too many other people really understood the medium at that point.
my perspective was very different because I was still active duty in the Navy at the time, and so having jumped into this with both feet. But my perspective is always very much different than the majority of other people that start a podcast. I was a blogger first, and be very frank, and not a very good one. There was probably,
Yeah,
on
I
a
was
good
too.
day, I would have 300 people maybe read my blog. That was a good day. And the reason I had a blog is because the bulletin board scene had died, and I needed a way to reach people and have some sort of engagement. So I already knew how to engage people online
Hmm.
through many, many years of having worked in community forums and bulletin boards and dealt with flame wars. So I already knew how to deal with the jerks of the world that would come in and make comments and learn how to not get my feelings hurt. So my perspective when I started the podcast was it was just another way to communicate with an audience that I wanted to establish a relationship with. Um, so for me, the big thing in my head from the very, very beginning was to have a relationship with the audience. And that's why even today, my audience is still known as the Ohana. It's still my family, extended family. So the only advantage I had that I think I had over other podcasters is that, well, number one, I was early. That definitely did not hurt. Number two was that I was blogging and continued to blog. So I gained a lot of audience. I still today gain a huge number of new listeners every month from organic search traffic that comes to my website at geeknewscentral.com. They come in and a small percentage, 1, 2, 3% will subscribe to the show. They may only stick around for one episode, but a portion of those folks stick around, which gets me fresh audience members coming in every
Mhm.
episode. So, but I also have this, today I'm able to afford to have a writing team. So I don't think this was, and I've said it many, many times. I've actually given talks about this, is that it was a jog, and a marathon versus the sprint, because it built slowly, and we, signed one of the first advertisers in space in July of '05, and you know, charge woefully weight. I had at the time maybe about 45,000 listeners in our rudimentary measurement tools that we're using. It was probably actually closer to 20. Who knows, because we really didn't have any tools at that point yet. And um, I took $300 for my first advertising deal first month, and when I talked to GoDaddy the after the first month, and they told me we signed like 370 new GoDaddy customers, I was like, whoa, 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 those,
Wow.
this is not this audience is worth more than $300 per episode, and I mean $300 a month, and we went back and renegotiated um a rate that was, appropriate for the number of new customers we were bringing in. So we had to make it. We were learning that, and again, I was an electronics technician. I worked on airplanes. I had no clue about the media space. I didn't know a CPN from a CPA from a CPC to a flat rate. I had no idea. So we made this up as we went, and so no, I wouldn't change anything.
And if you could give one piece of advice to somebody who's considering starting a podcast tomorrow, what would you say?
Don't look at your numbers for 2 years.
That's a great.
Yeah, because you'll be depressed.
Or mildly surprised.
Yeah, that's true. It can go the other way too. It's like, what?
If people spend as much time building their show brand and what they're doing, if they spend as much time doing that as they do in the production of their show, I always tell people I spent 10 hours editing. Take those 10 hours, cut it down to 1, and use those other 9 hours promoting your show in communities and in forums, and becoming um, a a thought leader in the topic that you're creating, and then over time you can shift that. But a lot of folks, they quit because they get wrapped around the axle of editing. People laugh, but I spend 10 minutes editing this show, my other show. There is no editing. Some people just
Uh,
can't do that, though.
well, that's the power of live, right?
Right.
It
Yeah.
gives you the option to do that, which is, I think it's a key to longevity in the podcasting space too. I mean, a lot of people get sucked into these multi hours of editing sessions on their shows, and that can actually be a good thing. If you look at these really popular shows
Sure.
like Serial and S Town and those, they have teams of post production editors that are working on those shows. Um, Huge budgets and things like that. So, but most podcasters just don't have the time. They're working a full time job,
We
or they're trying to do other things.
This is a story I like to tell. We were NAB exhibiting, and we learned very quickly at NAB that there's a lot of people that are running around looking for content, and content play. There's just as much content as there is out there. There's not enough content. People globally want content, so we're talking lots of content deals. And I always used to laugh. I'm like, this is just RSS. But anyway, the one of the guys came to the booth and he says, "Man, I got the best deal you've ever heard of for production for a series of 12 shows." And I'm like, I'm kind of like, okay. And he says, "Yeah, we've got a production deal going on right now, $2,000 per episode for an audio program." And I looked at the guy, and I'm like, 95% of our content creators have a production budget of a zero, and
Of
yet
minus $12.
and they are, their production budget is zero, yet they're putting out one or two episodes every week. And this guy looked at me like he was like, I think one of those moments when you get hit like a hammer. Someone says something to you, and you just and your life flashes before your eyes, and you're thinking, my business model that I'm in is screwed. I think he realized it kind of right then. It was like the dynamic had changed. So to your point, Rob, S Town, what do they spend? They probably spend more than $2,000 in production costs per episode.
Mm-hmm.
But and I'd like to see their budget numbers on how much it costs to produce a single episode. I think most podcasters would be shocked, but
Mhm.
on what it really is. But again, it achieved what, 11 million downloads or something like that in a short amount of time. So spectacular results. But the majority of us peons out here who are doing a single show on our own, we are the production crew, and most of us have wives, girlfriends, kids, and if you're spending 10 hours editing for a show that's not making you any money,
Mhm.
if you have a spouse, I'm sorry, you're going to have relationship issues.
That is so true. Yeah. Um, yeah, and a lot of those shows, I mean, there's a direct correlation between what's invested, but that also drives them into the season format that they have too. Uh, can you imagine if they did 52 episodes a year like we do, at 2,000 or 3,000 or $4,000 an episode? That's a big budget. You would think they'd be able to do it though, to some degree, but their team just might get burned out, or they want to work on other projects too. And that could be, I oftentimes think that this season thing is really all about the content producer than it is about the audience, because it doesn't feel like, and Todd, you would agree with this, I'm sure, that the audience wants it to just keep flowing week after week, not have these seasonal 20 episode series and then it stops for 6 months.
I've
So
already said seasons are fantastic, as long as one season ends on a Saturday and the next season begins next Saturday.
do you think this is happening partially
That's
because of the binge watching on Netflix type of vibe that we get now? Because we have the ability to watch an entire 16 seasons of one show in a weekend, or I guess maybe not in a weekend, but in a couple of weeks. Do you think that this is part of the sort of like a cultural shift, or do you think there's still a really strong case for consistent content every
yes.
week, like most of us
Yes.
do?
Yes, I think there is a strong case, and this medium proves that. Yeah.
Right. What do you think about the whole binge watching, binge listening idea, though?
I don't know if I have ever binge listened. So I think it's a personal thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
obviously people binge listen to S Town.
Yeah.
So
Well, I think it's also, this concept of, that actually, I believe Amazon or Netflix kind of pioneered this, where you put out all your episodes at once, right? So if you have a whole season of produced programs, you publish them all at once.
right,
And
right.
this was actually done on TV shows, on
Well, that's
digital
that's
TV
what he was
shows.
getting to, Rob. Do you think?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But and and I think that really applies. It's more of a paradigm of audiobooks, right? It's that same kind of thought process, right? You want to put out all the chapters. Now, granted, early on in the podcasting space, audiobooks would put out an episode a week or a chapter a week. And so I think we're seeing, I mean, I agree with you, that I think that this is kind of like a relatively new thing, that putting out everything all at once creates a binge opportunity. Um, I'm not entirely sure that that's what everybody necessarily wants with podcasting, though.
I also think too, as if I relate it to my own show, I expect my audience to have consumed it within 96 hours because the content's going to die because I do that type of content. But also,
Yeah.
they tune in
Well,
because I'm sharing current relevant stuff going on in the world. Going back and listen to a show of mine, and I've had some audience members do this. They say, well, this is like going through memory lane of previous news and history of what's going on in the world of tech. And I don't
yeah.
consider my show to be a history show. It's current events show, but
Yeah.
depends on your perspective too. So folks that are doing content that is very okay. Let's say you're building evergreen content, which a lot of shows say they are evergreen, but I've said this many times. The majority of them do not,
Aren't.
yeah, do not attain that status.
Yeah.
If you're trying to build evergreen, you cannot talk about what's going on in the world. You cannot talk about anything that is time
Timely.
sensitive or timely.
Yeah.
You have
Yeah.
to leave all that content out of there. And then, so if you're doing that, if you have to leave that content out and you're trying to build an evergreen show, you have to be very generic because if you're talking about your kid and then they go
Hmm.
to your website and your Facebook page and they see your kid is now 10 and you were talking about them being in diapers, well, again, you have to be very, very careful on that if you're trying to truly build evergreen content for the long haul.
Well, plus, Todd, there's another part of this too with this whole binge topic. RSS and the distribution platforms were not built to
Mm-mm.
really support publishing of entire, blocks of content.
Yeah.
The whole publishing platform for podcasts was built to deliver episode after episode because a lot of the software, Apple software, which is the biggest, isn't designed to work with, binge watching a podcast. It's designed to deliver episode after episode. Until we change that paradigm, and there's some new setting that exists in an RSS feed where, you know, but a lot of people still consume this on a subscription, right? So you
Hmm.
subscribe, you select how many episodes you want to have delivered to your device, and they come out weekly. So these guys that are publishing, um, you know, 10 episodes at once are basically thinking that people are coming in and streaming this content, not getting it as a download.
They can do some things to order. There is the ability to order within iTunes now, but
Uh-huh.
you have to really, and I don't know if S Town did that or not. I didn't actually look at their listing to see if they
Where
if
you,
they did it that way.
yeah,
Uh,
where
You
you
get chapters
sort
of
it
like
based
one, two, three,
on
four.
the oldest first. Is that what
you
you're saying?
can set it up, and it's tricky. You can set it up so you can do oldest, yeah, oldest first, oldest
Mhm.
and newest, but you got to set up a specific set of tags to do
Yeah.
that. Now, I didn't look at the listing. If someone's in the chat room wants to go look at iTunes and look at S Town, let me know if they stacked them newest to oldest, but or oldest to newest. The
Hmm.
but and then I always laugh too, and it goes right back to doing things, taking advice of people that understand what's going on in the space. I'm going to launch 10 episodes. That's what I'm going to launch my show with. And I'm like, okay. Probably your most recent 3 episodes will probably do the best. That number 1, 2 episode may not even be listened to by a
Yeah.
lot of folks. So, if you want to launch with 3, that's probably safe, but at least wait a week before you do number 4, or at least 2 or 3 days. But if S Town had put stuff out 1 new episode every 2 days, the I wonder what their total download volume would have been had they done it that way. But I don't know. No one would have consumed S Town the other way around. They specifically knew they had to listen to episode 1. So that's a special case, though, Rob.
Hmm.
It was
Yeah.
just kind of an interesting new entry, right? Because I mean, it's not going to work for reality TV. It's not going to work for sports. It's not going to work for a lot of our shows that are kind of like relevant to what's happening. But you think it is an interesting new opportunity now for podcasters to, if this is what they choose to do for a specific reason. I mean, S Town worked because, like you mentioned, it's almost like a book. It's like
Yeah.
you listen to the book and then you're done.
Daniel, was the episodes, and Daniel says S Town has the same publish date on all episodes. Is it listed the last episode first or the first episode first in their listing? I know it was all published on the same date, but what's the rack and stack?
Let me look it up on my phone right now.
And it may look differently on the phone than it will. Well, it shouldn't look different in the phone. But, we're spending a lot of time in S Town, and the people that listen
Yeah.
to this podcast, we just got to remember, too, are largely independent podcast creators. Although we do have our secret mystery listeners out there that listen and send us comments from time to time. I think we had an
It's,
email actually come in, didn't we, Rob? Did we cover that on the last show?
I don't think so. I think we tend to just jump in, and we sometimes don't pull those in.
Yeah, so we're being bad hosts, bad host.
We are bad boy.
Yeah. The
Let's see if I can find it.
So while we're having this uncomfortable pause here, so for those of you that haven't went over to the website, those of you who are within striking distance of Calgary, let me put this up on the screen for you. Definitely go to podsummit.com. Looks like you've got a few tickets left. It's a single day event happening on May 6th. You've already kind of got the rundown of the speakers. I see that there was 2 levels of tickets. It's appears to be $125, I assume Canadian to go.
Yeah, so basically it's about $50 US at this point in time with our exchange rate.
Really? The exchange
No,
rate's
it's
that
not.
bad? I was going to say, whoa.
There's about 30% difference. So whoever is coming up from the States is getting a great deal on hotels and shopping and as well as the conference.
Oh, man. Yep. Been there, done that, going to Japan and so forth. But so it looks like it's going to kick off. Going to be a morning mixer starting at 8 a.m. Then a 9 a.m. State of the Union. We got that's actually you did know that that's a trademark term. I'm just kidding.
Okay, good God. I was like, no. Oh, I had to. You know what? I had some. I had to change the name of the conference once, and I had to change the logo of the conference once. So now I'm like super sensitive about everything being in any way remotely similar to anything else. But yeah, so it'll be.
I want you to tell us about what that State of the Union is gonna cover and how that's going to be presented.
So basically, State of the Union is just going to be an opener for the conference. We're just going to talk about the state of podcasting in North America and kind of some of the new trends and things that are happening that people should be aware of. What's interesting about this particular conference is that we have folks coming in that are seasoned podcasters, and we have folks that are coming in that are thinking about starting a podcast. So it kind of covers the whole gamut in between. So the State of the Union will talk about some of the trends, such as rising in there's a rise in listenership, different type of devices, some of the things that we talked about today, and then we'll kick it off for the day and give everybody a fair warning because we'll be doing some live clips and live streaming throughout the day. And also give them an opportunity to say that, hey, these are some of the really cool things that you can win throughout the day. We have some really great giveaways that we're really excited about as well.
Awesome. Hey, Daniel did confirm for us that they are using the iTunes order tag, so it is basically Chapter 1 is the first download that they would get. So, but no, not very many people actually use the chapter tags. So, but they are. So they did at least do that right, Mike. I mean, Rob.
But does that mean that once they've subscribed, they don't get an automatic download of the most recent episode then? So
well, if they
so you have to go in and actually select that episode and download it manually.
Yeah, unless you, depending on how you have your subscription set up, but iTunes defaults to either 3 or 5. Not iTunes, the Apple Podcast app.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
But if you listen to the first 2 or 3, you're going to go hunt and look for the rest of them. So
yeah, but it does kind of break the core function of how podcasting was built as a subscription model. Yeah,
it's just a different way to do it. But if you are going to do a series like that, definitely use the iTunes order tag. But here's the problem: that iTunes order tag then is they're going to have to create a whole new show listing for their next show. So then the whole audience has got to shift. And I'm always like, why would you, if you're going to do productions like that, then you can, why don't you name it something that is, I don't know. I think I would maybe look at it a different way. I would produce under a brand then, and then have the series come in under the brand. But
you would have like a collection of series.
Yeah. But again, you can mix it 5 different ways. You could have both. You could have a brand feed, and then you could have a show feed. I think I would have both. I don't know if they do or not. I don't know if they've got a collective of both series. That
I
if I
think they're
was,
both individual as it sits right now. I don't know.
yeah, I
I
think
haven't seen
so.
a collective.
Yeah, I don't think they have, but anyway, that
And this brings up a really good point too, because they leverage the American Life and Serial in order to build up an audience
of
for
course,
S Town,
yeah,
right? With them being three individual properties, the downloads were certainly very high for S Town to start off with, and then is it still going to regain that kind of a trajectory still? That'll be an interesting thing to see, once it dies down a little bit.
yeah. I don't know, but they definitely their PR team worked really. I mean, it was just like we got slammed
Hmm.
with articles. Hey, let's go ahead. We got a little bit of time left here, not much actually. So I want to go through a little bit of the other. I'm just looking at both podtopod.com and podcasternews.com. For those of you that are not already in the Slack channel for Pod to Pod, definitely request an invite. It's real easy. You just go to pod.slack.com and you request a request. They'll approve you immediately. You'll get in. You may not even have to be approved, but a lot of people are starting to show up over there. The Gimlet head of marketing just showed up that does the ad sales. So there's some mainstream folks that are coming in that are joining the conversation. So definitely consider that. And then I'm just looking through the list here. There was some additional news that came out from Podcast Movement about them announcing some new speakers. Um, and I'm not familiar with these three, but Rabia Chadre, Colin Miller, and Susan Simpsons are the hosts of The Undisclosed. They're going to be keynoters. Shannon Kaysen, who performed at South by, will be a keynote speaker. I don't know her either. He is the host of Homemade Stories, which partnered with WEBZ Chicago. And what else is in the news? Oh, I'm sure many of you that are Bernie fans know that Senator Bernie Sanders has started a podcast. And Rob, I dug into his show a little bit. He's actually using the Senate server. He's actually got an RSS feed that I looked to see if it was compliant or if they were hand jamming it. I think that the Bernie Sanders team is using a tool to create his feed. I don't think it's a native part of the Senate's system. It may be, but I looked at where the media was being served, and he's definitely using it looks like government CDNs and stuff. So it looks like that. The sad part about his show is it's a recap of some stuff that he's already done. It's not a lot of
Mm.
original
I
content
thought
yet.
yeah, I thought it was part of the audio was coming out of some videos that he was involved in.
Yeah, it is. What else has there been in the news here? Of course,
And
there's the Peabody Awards. I don't know if you guys knew about this, but the 2017 Peabody Radio Podcast nominees have been announced. I didn't even know they were taking nominees in the radio podcast category. This is new. So, this is something that all of you that will want to watch in the future, in order to, if you could win a Peabody as a podcaster, oh, that would be huge. A life sentence, victims, offenders, justice, and my mother from transom.org, homecoming from Gimlet Media, how to be a girl, Marlo Mack, in partnership with KUOW in Seattle, in the dark, and APM reports, the Heart, Silence Evidence series, This American Life, the unexplained disappearance of Mars Patel LLC from Panoply, Unprison, WNO, and Air, and Wells Fargo Hertz Whistleblowers by NPR. So a lot of radio folks obviously submitted for a Peabody there. So in future years, we'll keep track of this. And if they're actually taking nominees for podcasts, that's going to be awesome. Um,
Todd, I found that that email that you were referring to that was sent to us. It
oh,
was a
go ahead.
question about the show. It was from John Troyer, and he was wanting us to talk about audio players. So you think about the web embeddable audio players that are out there and the options that exist out there and how that's kind of a um, little bit of a competitive world. You start thinking about the SoundCloud audio player, and you think about each one of us, each of our platforms. Your platform, Spreaker, Art19, all these guys. Everybody's pushing out uh, these very kind of slightly different audio players, and and so he was wanting us to kind of talk about that, and because he was really liking the SoundCloud audio player, and I commented back to him that one of the things that why he sees what he sees in the market around audio players is because none of the competitors of SoundCloud want to come out with an audio player that's copying what SoundCloud has created very early on, which created kind of a standard in the audio playing or the audio player kind of market, right? And I don't think we've really ever talked about this topic very much, and I think it's an interesting one. Is kind of how that audio player market has developed over the years. And I know I've been kind of, you've been involved in it, I've been involved in it, but I don't think there's been much talk about it. But how each of the competitors, right, of SoundCloud, you guys, Libsyn, us, and all of the platforms out there, we all kind of like what SoundCloud does, and we tend to kind of look at it and go, okay, how can we do it a little bit better, right? Or how can we do it a little bit different? Because none of us really wants to copy SoundCloud entirely, because we don't want to be known as platforms that are just copycats of
Some have.
other people.
Some
Yeah,
have.
yeah. So that's the question that he was really asking, was just to have us talk about why we do what we do with audio players.
Well,
Todd, do you have some thoughts on it?
oh, I do. My perspective has always been, and you're going to be hearing, and I apologize. This is, wearing my Blueberry shirt here. This is my perspective, your brand, your podcast, your IP, your feed. You're going to hearing a lot from me about those specific topics, and specifically through our new podcast that we launched at Blueberry called Your Podcast. And when we put our new player together, and there was, you'd be surprised how much dev time and how much money you can spend on a player. And we're about ready to do round 2 of it to make it a little more configurable. Matter of fact, that's what we have an intern that's going to get tasked to basically make it so that our particular player can be skinned. But I told the team, and not to dog any of the competitors. And Rob, I haven't looked at your guys' specific player in a little while, but we did not want our branding to be on the player. We wanted our customers' branding to be on the player. So, in any of you that, and again, I apologize, Rob, I can bring up an example of yours if you want me to.
Sure.
If you look at our player on the new media show, what do I have? I've got the new media show logo. I've got the standard player buttons, the ability to subscribe, the sharing tools, all the things that all the modern players have, and it's also embeddable, so someone can take that just like a YouTube embed and put it on another website. But my main thing was nowhere on here does it say blueberry.com at all. There's no Blueberry logo. If you're paying me to use my service, why do I need to advertise on your show? So that was kind of my, for a better word, um, sticking point. I was more worried about loading their site up with branding. Functionality, a player's a player, and some of them have different looks and designs, and I know some people pick hosting providers just because of the player, but let's be honest. And there's even players being sold as plugins that people are selling separately. The number of people that are listening on a website continues to decline. So it's important because it gives your site this nice look. But if you look at your podcast stats, you actually see how many, and we break it out. You can tell how many people actually played on the page in your stats. So, Rob,
And
do you have a URL that you can send me that I can put yours up?
uh,
Or
you
maybe I
can
can just go over your website.
well, you could go over to adore.fm.
Adore.fm. Okay.
Yeah, that's a good place to quickly get access to some players.
Okay.
Yeah,
So,
so we have if you scroll down and click on the Speaker Live Show, which is at the bottom of the page, which might be
Aha.
a better
All right.
right there on the right there, and you'll see a player
So
load there.
you've got a playlist player. Go ahead.
Yeah, so this is like one version of what we have, and Todd, we do have some branding on some of our players, but some of our players just have a little star on it, and that's all they have on it. But
Right.
this particular version of it does have the branding on it, and that's pretty consistent with with a lot of the platforms in the space. You're kind of the exception to that, and I don't disagree with what you're doing. I think it's terrific, but not all the players in the space remove their branding from their players.
Almost no one does.
Yeah,
Hmm.
exactly. So
I use
so this is what we're doing. But as you can see, the show album art is the prominent experience in the player. But this version of it, you can basically drop this embed into your web page and basically
Whoops.
have all your episodes available right there.
And then the only real delta then for ours, and see if I've got it set up on, excuse me. I don't think I have it. We've got a playlist player too, but let's see here. Let me bring it up. It looks considerably different. Yeah, here it is. Here's our playlist player. Excuse me, but this is basically using the default WordPress player option where you can build a playlist. So this is not even Blueberry PowerPress specific. This is purely
This is
designed,
WordPress.
yeah, from
Yeah.
WordPress. Yeah.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
again, there's 25 ways to skin a cat when it comes to players, but that was our thought process. Again, we in our mindset as a company and our philosophy, and I've talked about this many times, is provide the tools, provide the service, get the hell out of the way, and don't impact someone's brand and building their show. So it's just, I understand why companies put their branding on there. Obviously, oh, there's Spreaker, there's Libsyn. Let's go over there and look at theirs, and you guys probably get business because of that. So do I sacrifice market share? Probably. But again, I've also have the advantage of having this, 65,000 people using PowerPress too. So that gives me a distinct advantage. It's kind of a trade-off, right?
Yeah.
Um,
well, it's
Exactly.
going to
I mean,
attract a certain type of.
John, who actually wrote this email, his comment was he feels it's dumb that people are so in love with the SoundCloud's
oh,
player, but it's dumb to pick a hosting provider based on the player that they offer, and it would make life easier if more people just made a player that looked almost exactly the same as SoundCloud.
it's it's
Um,
it's it's awful
yeah,
tempting.
yeah, yeah.
But that little squiggly line they have on a SoundCloud player, it has no relation to the actual audio level of the show. It's just some random generated bullcrap. It's not actually to the level of the actual sound either. That's what often makes me laugh. But you know,
Yeah,
It
it's
does
just
work, and it's well, it's easy to navigate, and I get it. There's a certain attraction to it too, and some folks that are considering a host based on the player are clearly thinking about, how am I going to embed this in my website? Is it scalable? Is it responsive? How does it look? Is it going to enhance my branding? So I think the decision that you're making to remove the Blueberry branding out and make it brandable to whatever website is hosting it, I think that's definitely going to attract a lot of podcasters that want to have that control, and that is a cash in itself. On the other hand, like you mentioned earlier, I host with Libsyn right now, and I was looking at buying a podcast player plugin and for my WordPress install, and I haven't really found one that I really liked. And so that is still an opportunity for growth for for hosting companies and for if there was a really good plugin that's quick to load and it looks really good on mobile, that would be definitely the way to go. I think for a lot of podcasters, and I think a lot of podcasters would be willing to switch for that as well.
Yeah, I think we're probably going to ultimately sell the player as a separate product offering, but we're not quite there yet.
Hmm.
But we got to make this next step of making it more, more brand, more color choices and that kind of stuff. But, it's just and what you'll also find too is that a lot of people that are on SoundCloud do not have their own .com. There's a
Right.
huge, huge number of shows over that. That's their sole point of presence. And every time when someone tells me that, I just shudder, because their world could come tumbling down at any time, based on the situation going on over there. But I wish I could have lost $56 million last year.
Well,
No, you
technically
wouldn't
you
want
could
that,
have.
Todd.
You might not be where you are now,
Oh
but
no, there would be no company. It'd be gone. So
Crash and burn.
yeah,
Yeah.
but anyway, thanks for that. That was a good comment, a good discussion point. So you
Yeah,
know,
John, thanks for the email, and certainly Todd and I want to see more of these type of
yeah.
emails. So I mean, there's like blind spots that we have that sometimes our listeners see around topics, and this is certainly a great one to talk about.
So we are already well over 90 minutes, and as I can
Yes.
tell, the people on Facebook and YouTube are dropping off. So we want to thank.
They've
And
had enough of us, Todd.
yeah, absolutely. So Ernest, any final comments on Pod Summit or last promo for it here?
You know what? If anybody is in the Western area and they want to come visit, we'd love to have you. It's going to be a full day of learning, and we're eventually going to post up the videos as well, so we'll have an opportunity for you to interact one way or the other. And that's about it. I really enjoyed having you being on your show. I really appreciate it. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk about podcasting and podcast conference as well. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for
Yeah,
being here. We definitely and Rob, thanks for asking Ernest to come on.
yeah, that's great.
So
Great to have
folks,
him on. I think it
uh,
has, what he's doing up there has terrific potential, and I want to support him. So
and I think a good opportunity to have a good mid-year or middle, kind of in between some of the other shows too. So I think I picked a good time for it. If you want to reach out to us, and I'm making lots of podcaster mistakes by saying a lot today, uh, but I won't edit them out, as you know. If you have any comments, you can reach me, Todd at blueberry.com or at Geek News on Twitter. First, we want you to subscribe to this show at newmediashow.com. Click on the iTunes or Android subscribe link, and we do make it available for you Android users to be able to one-click subscribe. Rob, how about you? Where can they reach you?
well, I would say send me an email, rob at Spreaker.com, and that's with an R, and or you can just send it to rob at robgreenlee.com, and I'm on Twitter at Rob Greenlee, and definitely want to hear from you.
I appreciate everyone hanging out with us for the show today. And Ernest, if they want to send you a comment or an email, is there a good contact for you?
Absolutely. You can find me at ernestbarbaric.com. You can find me on Twitter at ebarbaric, EBARBARIC. I'm happy to connect with as many podcasters as possible to help you promote your shows as well through the conference. So any of those will work. Or hello at ernestbarbaric.com is my personal email.
All right, folks, that's going to wrap us up here today. And I want to thank everyone again, for listening or watching, whichever it may be. And make sure you stay subscribed. Everyone, take care. We'll see you next weekend. No, I'll be in at
No,
NAB, so no
yeah,
no show
and so
next
will I
weekend.
be.
Yes, we'll talk
Yes.
about that schedule here. But all right, everyone, take care. We'll see you next time on the New Mini Show. Take care. Bye bye.